Hey, this is Josh Hotchkiss, attorney here at Ramos Law. I want to talk to you guys about a case that has recently been in the news. It's a tragic homicide that occurred in November of 2022 in Moscow, Idaho. 4 students were brutally killed by an individual later identified as Brian Kohberger. What I want to talk to you guys about are some of the very interesting legal issues that arose during the case. And one of those was how they caught the guy. So everybody probably is familiar with DNA evidence made famous, very famous during the O.J. Simpson trial. And in this case, in the Brian Kohberger case, again, a central component was DNA evidence and how the police officers, law enforcement gathered that evidence. So the FBI got involved in this case, and for good reason. There was going to be a very critical component, which was the identification of the defendant, Mr. Kohberger. They didn't have an idea of who he was, but what they did do was recover a sheath, a knife sheath, at the scene of the crime. And that knife sheath was located next to one of the bodies. They were able to obtain DNA evidence. However, they did not have a match. They did know that it was a male match and that it was somebody that was likely to be Caucasian. From that point, through some pretty interesting investigative techniques, they were able to track cell phone data, and they narrowed their search down to Mr. Kohberger. But they needed to match that DNA evidence. And here's how they did it. They did what law enforcement refers to as a trash rip. So law enforcement went all the way out to Pennsylvania to where Mr. Kohberger's parents lived. And they waited for Mr. Kohberger's parents to discard their trash. They grabbed that trash and they discovered a Q-tip, and they were able to extract DNA from the Q-tip. Now, interestingly about that, 2 issues. The expectation of privacy. So once you discard trash, there really is no expectation for privacy. And so law enforcement had every reason and right to obtain the trash and then to analyze it. What became very interesting about that case is they did not get a Q-tip that contained Brian Kohberger's DNA. What they did do was get a Q-tip that contained his father's DNA. And from that, they did a genealogical analysis, and they discovered that it was likely Brian Kohberger's DNA that was a match for the father and for the sheath that was recovered at the scene. Coupled with that, they were able to obtain cell phone data from Mr. Kohberger's cell phone for the area where the homicide occurred, which of course was right outside of the campus at University of Idaho. And so with those 2 very powerful pieces of evidence, they were able to secure an arrest and later a plea of guilty. So pretty fascinating legal issues with respect to DNA, pretty fascinating legal issues when it came to the genealogical analysis of the DNA that was recovered. So ultimately, as most people probably have seen in the news, very recently, I think in June, Mr. Kohberger ended up pleading guilty to 4 homicides and the burglary. What is tragic in this whole outcome is that we'll never really know what the motivation was for this, if there could have been one. But what we do know is the killer is now behind bars, which is a very good outcome for law enforcement, and hopefully it gives closure to some of the victims' families.